First, tonight's G20 leaders meeting in Rio de Janeiro have pledged to ensure billionaires pay their fair share of taxes. A final communique committed to closing loopholes that allow the wealthy to avoid tax. Brazil's President Lula has made tackling growing wealth inequality a key theme of this year's G20 meeting. He pointed to a proposal which would tax the world's 3,000 richest billionaires 2% to raise $250 billion for global challenges. The commitment in the communique, clamping down on tax avoidance, had initially faced resistance from Argentina, whose libertarian leader said he rejected more state intervention. But there was general agreement among the leaders on calls for ceasefires in Gaza and Lebanon, tackling global hunger, and pursuing lasting peace in Ukraine.
Aos membros desenvolvidos do G20.
To the developed countries, members of the G20, I propose that they bring forward their climate neutrality targets from 2050 to 2040 or even 2045. Without assuming their historical responsibilities, the rich nations will have no credibility to demand ambition from the others.
Senhoras e senhores, precisamos de uma governança climática mais forte.
Ladies and gentlemen, we need stronger climate governance. There is no point in negotiating new commitments if we don't have an effective mechanism to accelerate the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Brazil invites the international community to consider the creation of a climate change council at the UN, which would bring together different actors, processes and mechanisms that are currently fragmented.
I'm proud to announce the United States is pledging $4 billion over the next 3 years to the World Bank's International Development Association. As my friend Ajay tells you, the IDA is the first responder to the world's poorest countries. I encourage everyone around this table to increase their pledges in December. In addition, we have to mobilize private capital at scale. I'm proud of my country's work in this fund, including mobilizing $60 billion through the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. The United States strongly supports Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Everyone around this table, in my view, should as well. And by the way, Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine led to the highest record food prices in all of history. In Gaza, as I've said before, Israel has the right to defend itself after the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. But how it defends itself, even as Hamas cruelty hides among civilians, matters a great deal. The United States has led the world in humanitarian aid to Gaza. And we're going to keep pushing to accelerate a ceasefire deal that ensures Israel's security, that brings hostages home, and ends the suffering of the Palestinian people and children.
President Biden, and before him, President Lula. Well, for his reaction to this, I'm joined now in the studio by Andrew Mamedu, who is Country Director of Action Aid Nigeria, an international charity working to free the world from poverty and injustice. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you, Charles.
So the idea from Brazil, you heard a bit of it there, which is hosting the G20 summit, is that the world's billionaires should pay a 2% tax to generate some $250 billion a year, money that could be used to help alleviate poverty, tackle climate change, etc. What's your reaction to that?
Thank you very much, Charles. I think first of all is to look at why is this demand being made. The last statistics we have on the level of poverty in the world, we have 720 million persons living in extreme poverty to $2.25. And what that means is that, so also attached to that, you have 350 million persons globally living in extreme hunger. So these are realities that we are faced with in a world that is supposed to be a just world. And on the other extreme, you have billionaires, like the richest man today, okay, I'll call Elon Musk, with $320 billion with that amount, you can actively lift 250 million persons out of poverty. So it is about progressive, it's about equity. So it's about looking at fairness. When you look at fairness, so the reason why we have poverty, it boils down to the issue of poverty and injustice. So the reason why we have poverty globally, including Nigeria, is as a result of inequality and injustice. So the level of inequality, we're not saying that everybody is going to be at par, but we're saying that people should live the basic minimum, $2.25. So clearly, if people live the basic minimum, then you could have all the billions you want to. So advocating for a 2% extra tax. So if you have $100 million, 2% of $100 million is just $2 million. And I'm sure with your $98 million, you could still live your life you want to live. So that 2% extra will definitely go a long way in lifting millions out of poverty. So I think that's the discussion we should be having.
Well, that's a very interesting point, and thank you for putting it so clearly. Is it actually going to happen, or is it looking unlikely at the moment? Because Argentina, the US, and others have criticized it, so it doesn't look like they're going to get the consensus that Brazil wants, does it?
No, we're not going to get it. So you could hear the communique. So the communique is just a political response to what Brazil is asking. Brazil was very clear, we need 2% of tax. And so at the end of the day, the communique says, oh, we're going to ensure that billionaires pay their tax. What does that mean? So if you come to Nigeria, the Nigerian government will tell you that, oh, we would ensure that the rich people pay their taxes. And one thing that comes to mind is elections. When you come to the country during election, we're able to buy forms for 100 million and plus. We're able to run billions of naira in campaigns. But if you look at the tax that these individuals are paying, is not commensurate with what they are executing. So it's just a political response. They're like, okay, just let us be. We will just ensure that billionaires pay their tax. You could see the role that Elon Musk played in the victory of Donald Trump.
Absolutely.
So tell me, how would a government like United States be able to fairly and squarely task Elon Musk to be able to generate these resources we are doing? So it's a political response, but clearly it is a deviation from the theme of the G20 summit. So the theme basically focused on a just world, especially on eradicating poverty and hunger, as well as influencing global institutional reforms. If we want to have global institutional reforms, world governments, with the UN, the World Bank, and all of that, should be able to play a critical role. And in the G8, the G20 should be able to play that leading role. When it favors some of these countries, it's okay to bring out resources. So if you talk about the war in Ukraine, so it's okay to bring out resources. And war in Israel, it's okay to bring out resources. But when it comes to issues of war and poverty, it's difficult for those resources to find their way to the table.
Nevertheless, the wider theme that's emerging from that G20 summit is what appears to be a willingness to address inequality. I mean, I agree with you that it's a political statement, political rhetoric at the moment, but at least that rhetoric is being made. And on that, there appears to be consensus on fighting inequality.
Charles, we've had this consensus, we've had this agreement, we've had this political statement way back. But we're not matching it with clear action. So a good example is the issue of climate change. So when you look at issues of climate change, how would world leaders, for example, Nigeria, the global south, we only contribute 2% of global emission, but the global north that contributes 98% of it is not able to play their role in.
Or is not willing.
It's not willing to. Yeah, it's not willing to play their role. And so I think that's what's compared. That's what we'll compare to this. We would always have this kind of rhetoric. We always have this kind of political statements and all that. But how do we commit to it? How do we take actions? I think kudos to Lula. That is what a president should do. And I'm sure even if the G20 refuses, why can't each country, individual countries, take it up? Why can't Nigeria?
That's
Let's come
a
to
good
Nigeria.
point.
So if Brazil takes it up and runs with that, then let Nigeria take it and run with that. Let's not just wait for
Well, for that to happen in a country like Nigeria, there are a lot more things that would need to take place.
Yeah.
One of them is that you must tackle corruption. There's so many things that
Perfect.
you're going to have to get in place. And that is also what sometimes makes the developed world skeptical about these projects, because some of them would say we've given quite a bit of aid. That aid has dissipated. We've never actually seen what it has done. You mentioned the topic of climate change, which is something that they would probably struggle to agree on at that G20 summit. But, I mean, developing nations, as you said, feel it's unfair for developed countries that have been using fossil fuels for decades to suddenly get to decide what to do about tackling climate change. But the developed countries, they say, well, we can't just be funneling monies. I mean, once you give them the money, they'll divert it into whatever it is they consider to be of greater priority, that they often don't even think of their own people who are the ones mired in poverty. They don't think of, okay, let's do something to get them out of it. And it's unlikely that that money will go where it's supposed to go.
Yeah, if you look at the World Development Agenda, so the developed world has committed 0.7 of their GDP to aid for several reasons. So we can go into the issue of colonialization, the issue of climate change, the injustice across the world and all of that. But I totally agree. Nigerians, we need to hold our leaders accountable. So we have to have high level of accountability and transparency. Our resources can be better utilized. We totally agree. A good example is within the oil and gas sector. The oil and gas sector.
Nigeria shouldn't be as poor as this.
Shouldn't be, definitely. Yeah. We shouldn't be going cap in hand begging for things like this.
Absolutely.
But clearly, accountability, I think that's why ActionAid is pushing for how do we get citizens to hold our government accountable, not just at the national level, at the federal level, but across all tiers of government, particularly even local government now that we have local government autonomy.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you very much indeed. You make a lot of sense there, and we're all the better for having groups like ActionAid here. Andrew Mamedu is Country Director of ActionAid Nigeria. They're an international charity working to free the world from poverty and injustice.
Thank you,
Thank you very much indeed.